Time now for breathing lessons with Susan Kay, helping you learn how to breathe and release those beliefs that have been binding you so you can just enjoy life and breathe easy. Breathing lessons with Susan Kay.
Hi, this is Susan Kay with Breathing Lessons. Last week we talked about shame being on the lowest energy field that we can be in. Today we're going to talk about guilt. We are referencing this book that is The Power versus Force, which is a book that I read years ago that really helped me to see where I've been in the church, see where I've been in the idea of separation from God, see where I've been in relation to my fellow man. And so I'm just trying to share some of these things with you. Last week we talked about shame and the orphan culture. Shame and guilt are very, very, very much orphan culture. Orphans, and I'm really speaking metaphorically here. I'm not poking at people who have the experience of being orphaned, although it could fit. So I'm not saying it won't, but I'm just saying I'm just talking metaphorically mostly. You know, they are not claimed. They are not claimed as individuals. They are not claimed in family. They are not claimed. They don't feel known by anyone because your family unit is where you're supposed to feel known. I say supposed to because a lot of us didn't, and a lot of people don't. So orphan culture is the culture in our country, and I think all over the world, where we have taken on a belief that we are separate from our source. And so you can exchange the word source with God, or you can call it the field, or you can call it the universe. I don't care what you call it. But we are not separate from our source. If we were separate from our source, we wouldn't be alive. So we have agreed to the separation of everything. Everything is separate. You know, the table is separate from me, and the tree outside is separate from me, and my dog is separate from me, and all the elements in the world, the rocks, the birds, all the animals, the minerals, the fire, the water, is all separate from me. But I truly believe this. I believe that we are all resonating with the same tone, which is the tone of source. And we are living in a tone of source. So, and there are degrees of resonance. Got this again. There's degrees of resonance with source that are low or high. In other words, the higher you go, the more you are in resonance with your source, which is really part of you, okay? You could talk about this being the higher self or the true self, the one who is really truly you. You can talk about it as God in you. You can talk about you as in the divine. I don't care how you couch this, but I do believe that these things are true. Last week we talked about shame and the God view. And we all have a view of God. Even if we believe God is non-existent, it's still a view of God. So if you believe God is non-existent, then at least you don't believe that you're separate from God. I think honestly, atheists are healthier people in some ways than those of us who have believed in God, because they don't look to outside sources to give them what they need. Well, they probably do, but they don't do it in the sense of religion or looking to God being out there somewhere. So God, in the shame department, is a despiser. He despises us as people. You know, somehow he made us. We messed up somewhere along the way. So maybe it's the garden, maybe it's whatever. And he is now rejecting us and abandoning us and despising us and saying, why did I even make these people? The life view of shame is that life is supposed to be miserable. And I know a lot of people. I was one of those people who really believed this. And my view of life was that everything is miserable, everything is hard, everything doesn't work. I still feel that way about technology, but that's just my problem. Just nothing was going to come my way. Nothing was for me. Nothing worked for me. I was not being helped or upholded in any way. I was not known. I was not claimed, and I was not loved. So that's the miserable part of living in shame. And shame is, it really is a byproduct of the religion I was in. Probably most of the religions on the earth have shame as a foundational piece. We as Americans have a tendency to live in shame, but I really think we live more in guilt. But I'll talk about that in a minute. And so then the emotion of shame, and I'm just recapping from last week, is humiliation, being humiliated all the time and feeling humiliated about ourselves. And I think I shared last week that I've had times in my life, as a young person especially, where I had a lot of body dysmorphia, and I didn't like the idea that people could see me. And so for many, many years, I dressed in a way that you couldn't see me. I wore scarves, big scarves. And of course, they made me look heavy, and they made me look bigger than I was. But they also hid me from people seeing my figure. And it was just part of, again, this idea that women in particular need to be ashamed and cover up. If I could have worn one front and back, I would have, but I'm not British, so that wouldn't have worked. But anyhow, so that was humiliation, and I've come out of so much of that. And then the process for shame is elimination. God is always eliminating things out of your life that are shameful, whether it's, and I used the example last week of my mother chewing gum and thinking God was taking gum away from her. Silly thing, but it was sad because my mother felt and believed that God was always taking something away from her, because the only way to improve the person is to eliminate things out of their lives and eliminate them, really. Orphan culture eliminates the self and replaces the self with the Savior, with that which makes us look good, whether it's an education, we aren't ourselves, we're our education, or we're our money, or we are our position, or we are our title, or we are motherhood, or we are whatever, our talent. And the truth is, those things are not true at all. But orphan culture really puts us in a place of believing that. Guilt is very associated with shame. I don't think you find people who are shamed who are not also feeling very guilty. Now, and I'm going to take a drink of my tea. Thanks. Thanks for indulging me. Shame or guilt is, of course, something that if you don't have guilt at all, you're considered a psychopath. So guilt is an emotion that passes through us when we feel we've done something that isn't correct or isn't right. Those who don't ever feel guilty for anything have no empathy or compassion for other people. They do not take responsibility for their own actions. So I'm not talking about the type of what we call guilt of admitting we've done something wrong, or paying a fine, or apologizing to someone if we've said something that we thought might have hurt them. I'm not talking about that kind of guilt. I'm talking about the intrinsic, ingrained guilt of just our existence that so many of us have walked around in and feeling guilty. So I was with a particular woman one day at a big shopping mall in New York State. And we had conversations about religion and those kinds of things. And I said, well, notice, we were talking about men and women and how it affects men and women differently. And it's not just the religious part of, who we are, or if we've been in religion, it's really our culture and the patriarchy and all of that. So I said, pay attention. Walk around the mall and pay attention. And she was saying sorry every 2 minutes. Like, she walked by someone and she wasn't anywhere near them. She'd say sorry. And then, anything. Sorry, sorry. And a man literally just almost bowled me over. And I said sorry. And he didn't say anything. And so these are the types of things that, so I know as a female, and I don't know that all female feel this way, and I'm not one of these angry feminists, but I understand that there is a double standard, and I do know that women have this sense of not having the right to take up space. I think that's why, as a young person, I was very much on the cusp of anorexia. I quit eating when I say I quit eating, I would limit my calories to like 100 or 200 calories a day. And I had certain things I would eat, but I would not eat anything else. And I got down to the higher 80 pound range. And I really feel like I was trying to disappear because I felt guilty for taking up any room. I think women in particular, and sometimes children, whether boys, girls, or whatever, feel like they are not seen or heard. And if they are seen or heard, they feel guilty for it because they're not supposed to be seen or heard. Some of us were raised in that culture of children should maybe be seen but not heard. Children should be quiet in the presence of adults. Women should be quiet in the presence of men. I was very much raised in this, but I don't think it's just a thing that I was raised in. I feel like this is our culture. This has been our culture, and I don't think men understand it like women do because I don't think they've experienced it quite the same. So the the God view of guilt, when you're living in guilt, your God view is that God is vindictive. God is going to get you for it. He's going to punish you for your guilt, for just being who you are. God is going to, there's a statement that just drove me crazy when I was in the church, but I wasn't sure why it bothered me. Well, now I do know why it bothered me. And the statement was, God loves you too much to leave you the way you are. And it was just this way of saying, you're not enough. You're not good. There's something wrong with you. And God's going to make sure, by God, it changes. And so that's that vindictive thing of you aren't right and you're guilty and you need to change. The life view of people who live in a state of guilt is that things are evil. What we do is evil. I mean, I remember when I was in the Baptist church growing up, but then as an adult I attended this Pentecostal crazy church, and we weren't allowed to go to movies and dances, and there were just things we were told were not things that we should do because they were evil, which made people sneak around and do them, maybe go out of town and do them. Whether it's drinking or going to the movie or playing blackjack or poker, I don't know what, but what that does is it produces a secretive life in people, and then that compounds the guilt on them as they cannot live up to this standard of holiness that we were taught was supposed to be true, but is not. The emotion for guilt is very interesting. It's blame. I find this sometimes, I am not finding this where I personally work, but I've seen it in places of employment where you have a person who is particularly guilt-ridden about just everything, and they just feel bad about themselves, and you'll find them projecting on others what they think that person is thinking about them, which isn't probably even true. But I've seen this in a big way. I'm thinking of one individual I know particularly that just consistently projects to others what she mirrors back to herself as guilt or blame. They think I. And last time she said something, I think I socked her in the arm because she's kind of a friend of mine. But anyway, but it's very telling. And so the emotion is blame. I have to blame someone for why I'm guilty, and I feel blamed. I remember when, and I don't know if my children even watch these, and if they do, I just want to share something, and that is that, and if they don't, I'm sharing it anyway. When my daughter came out of the church, she came out first, her and her husband, and anyone that comes out of the church who've been there most of their lives or whatever, they go through this season where they're angry, where they're defensive, where they're triggered by everything. I think I'm past that now, but it took me years. And every now and then she would kind of come and confront me about things that I neglected or I did. I was either overt or I was, neglectful that she needed, but because I was a Christian, I didn't. And I remember when this process started and she just felt the need to come talk, I remember feeling very blamed. And so anyway, recently we had a really great, and we have a good relationship. We've always had, I feel, a good relationship. I think she didn't feel that way for years because I was still a Christian and she wasn't. But we've got a good relationship. But anyway, I feel like, so recently we had a really good relationship, or good conversation. And she was just telling me that she sees that I've changed. And I said, well, what makes you know that I've changed? She said, well, one of the things is if I'm expressing, how I felt as a kid, you don't cry anymore. You don't just start crying. And I said, well, I've understood now that you aren't just blaming me, you're just expressing how it was for you, and that I can take responsibility for what I did without feeling guilt and shame, because I've owned it. And the way out of guilt and shame, and the way out of guilt especially, is when you own it. When I first started this job that I'm in, that I love, I did something really stupid one day, and I could have put a child who was with a relative. I let information out I shouldn't have let out, but I didn't know that it was not right to tell this person, which was a lawyer, something about this child. And immediately I realized I could have put that child in danger, and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe I made this mistake. Well, the lawyer was willing to say, I didn't hear it. I don't know what you're talking about. But it was one of those really stupid things you do when you're first learning a job and you don't really know what you're doing. But what I did was I owned it. I owned it with the person who was with this child. I owned it with my supervisor. Well, not my supervisor, but the other supervisor, because I'm a supervisor. And then I owned it with my boss. And I went to all these people and apologized and took ownership of it. And I don't feel guilty for it anymore because I owned it. And owning what's truly things you've done. But then you have to release this stuff. You can't carry around. There are things that if I wanted to, I could carry them around with me that are really not good things. And some of them have come to me lately of like, do you realize you did this? And there was a situation. And when those come up, and I feel like they're coming up just so that I can release them, because somewhere I'm carrying this stuff in my body that I've done these things, or I've said these things to people, or I've been ugly somehow, or I've taught things that were just separation theology and orphan culture, and that I've propagated a lot of this stuff in my past. So once you know how to do that and you know how to release yourself, but see, perfectionism also comes with shame and guilt of needing to prove that you are worthy and prove that you are perfect, that you have it all together. And these things create a situation in our lives that make us fake. We can't even be who we are because we can't be wrong. We can't be guilty of being a human. We cannot be a human. We have to give up our humanity so that we can take on Jesus, so that we can be like Jesus, and who can live up to that, and blah, 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 blah. So this is where we're at. And then the process of guilt is destruction. I think that with guilt and shame comes a lot of relational destruction. Back in the day when I felt guilty and shame for my appearance, for, I don't know, I used to have a perfect home. I used to have a spotless home. And a lot of that was just shame and guilt, feeling like I have to prove to everyone that I'm perfect somehow. And being a pastor's wife just made it way worse. And so, I was afraid all the time that someone was going to come to my house and it wasn't going to be perfect. And I lived this way for 40 years of my life, maybe. I still have a tendency to do that. If I know somebody's coming over, I kind of lose it and have to clean up really a lot. I'm working on that part. But we end up in the destruction of relationships because we can't relax. We can't be who we are. We can't do anything that won't boomerang on us and make us feel guilty. Like when the man comes slammed into me in the mall, I had just said this to this woman, and I just said, I'm sorry. And he looked at me like I had done something wrong. And, these are the things that we have to change in our culture. It doesn't mean that if you bump into someone, you shouldn't say sorry, or whatever. But that whole idea of I am small and I need to stay small and I need to not take up room and I need to not speak my mind. So, I'm not educated. I do not have a degree. And that has been another thing that has, followed me around all my life of, oh my God, I don't have a degree. I have no right to be in the conversation because I don't have a degree. Well, getting this job, I'm with people who are at least master's degrees, a lot of them. A lot of them are 4 years, some are masters, and some are PhDs. And I find that I have a place in the conversation. I have not made myself small because I belong where I am, and I know that I belong where I am, and I've owned that place. Now, do I think many of them know things that I don't know? Absolutely, and I'm sitting there learning the whole time. But I also have known things, and I have life experience that makes me, in some ways, an expert on some things. And so I do not sit back in shame and guilt and keep my mouth shut when I feel like I have something to contribute. If I don't think I have anything to contribute, hopefully I keep my mouth shut. But when I do feel like I have something to contribute, I open my mouth and I share what I know. And I've had more than one of them come back to me and say that was really insightful. And none of them know unless they ask, and I tell them, but nobody's really asked, what my degree is in. I should make up something. But anyway, and I say that laughingly, like it should be a joke when they ask me. I should make up something that's not really a degree that would explain why I know what I know. But anyway, that's my weird personality. So, shame and guilt, these are the two lowest levels of energy that you can function in, barely function. Under shame is literally death. If the lowest energy you can be in is shame. The next one up, like a teeny step up, is guilt. Next week we're going to talk about apathy. So I'm going to read some of these, and these go up. I'll read the force ones, the ones that are still in force. Force is different than power. Power is something we stand in innately. I have a right to be here. I have a right to be alive. I have a right to express myself. I am claimed, I am known, and I am loved. And force is the opposite of that. Force is that place we live in that we feel like we have to prove something. And we're going to force. And I have a lot to say about this later on. But so, bottom up, shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire. And desire is, again, one of those things like guilt. There's two different types: desire, anger, and pride. We don't go past force, the energies of force, until we come into a place of courage. And I can read the top layer now. Courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. Most of us don't get to the top layer, but we are working our way up, aren't we? So this is it for today. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and you will find that I have thoughts that might be able to help you, especially if you find yourself stuck in orphan culture. Some of you may listen to this and it may really make you unhappy because you've been in orphan culture your whole life and haven't recognized it. And then all of a sudden one day you recognize this really is what I'm in. It's important that we overcome orphan culture and become who we really are in the world. I'll see you next time on Breathing Lessons.
Thanks for watching Susan K today. Subscribe on the button below and be watching for more. Learn how to breathe with Susan K.